Hello and welcome to today's lesson, which is on A Poison Tree by William Blake. The first thing we are going to do is we're going to look at the context behind the poet William Blake. Okay, so William Blake was born in 1757 and actually was originally an engraver and a painter. So he started as an engraver and a painter, and then went back and added text and poems to match with those engravings and paintings. So he's actually known for being extremely interested in the presentation of poems as the poems themselves. And we're going to actually have a look at one of his paintings and how he presented A Poison Tree when it was published. Okay, so just for interest's sake, let's have a look at one of his most famous paintings. And you might have already seen this before. It's actually referenced in a few films, such as Red Dragon. We're also going to have a look at this. So this is how William Blake presented his poem Poison Tree. And it's just very interesting when we look at the form and the structure of the poem. Often we kind of read things into the way it's presented, but we know through this that William Blake was really interested in the aesthetics of poetry, as well as, of course, the words and the language devices themselves. Okay, in 1789, he published an illustrated set of poems called Songs of Experience, and in 1793 followed this with Songs of Experience, and Songs of Experience is where A Poison Tree is taken from. It's interesting. So the first set of poems is generally thought to be quite hopeful, quite positive, while the second set, and remember A Poison Tree comes from the second set, Songs of Experience, tends to be much more negative and pessimistic about the world and the human condition. So Blake was a deeply religious man, and this shows in the moral nature of his work. And this is really crucial context when you're analysing A Poison Tree, is to make religious links with some of the lines in the poems. So his poetry, interestingly, was not well regarded during his own life. However, today he is regarded as a man ahead of his time, and he's now thought of as a major poetic writer and one of the most famous poets of all time. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we are going to read through the poem before analysing it in line by line detail. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. And watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears. And I summed it with smiles, and with soft deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine. And into my garden stole, when the night had failed the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. Okay, so we're going to look in the poem in line by line detail, not a particularly long poem. So we're going to start off with the first line. Um, I was angry with my friend. And if we go on to the second line, I told my wrath did end. So quite simply, he was angry with his friend. This is obviously what the word wrath means as well. And actually thinking about religion here, wrath is one of the seven deadly sins. So that is a religious contextual link that you can make. But he's angry with his friend, but he tells his friend about his anger. So he says, I told my wrath did end. So because this anger to do with his friend was eating away at him, he decided to unload that burden, tell his friend, look, I'm angry at you. And as a result of him doing that, the anger ended. Now contrast this with the next two lines. I was angry with my foe. I told it not. My wrath did grow. So in this scenario, he's angry with an enemy. This is what the word foe means. But he chose not to tell this foe of his anger, and his wrath did grow. So his wrath, his bitterness, his anger begins to build inside of him. And actually, without explicitly mentioning a poison tree, this is where the extended metaphor of there being a poison tree begins, because he is going to feed this tree until it's going to grow and grow and grow, and he's going to feed it with this anger that he feels towards his foe, his enemy. So really having in mind here this metaphorical tree that he is going to grow using his own hatred and fear, um, and sadness towards his sworn enemy. So he says, and I watered it in fears. So again, deeply metaphorical. This hatred, there's obviously not a real tree, this is a metaphor. This hatred is just festering inside of him. And really, hate in some ways comes from fear. People hate somebody because deep down there is some sort of fear, um, about what that person represents, what they've done to you. So he's channeling all these fears into growing this, festering hatred. So night and morning with my tears. Um, so he's again not just channeling his fear, but this foe has done something to upset him, and he's maybe reflecting on all of the negative memories that that he's associated with his foe, and he's using these melancholy, sad feelings. He's taking them and allowing this metaphorical tree to grow and grow. So the next line he says, and I sunned it with smiles. So this is an interesting break from, him being upset, him being fearful. This time he's talking about smiles. So perhaps, he's being rather duplicitous, two-faced here. The fact that he hates this foe, however, he's sunning it with, almost a fake smile. He's putting on a facade that perhaps he likes the foe when really he's plotting the foe's demise. Okay, what about the next line of this stanza? And he says, and with soft, deceitful wiles. So the idea of a what wiles is you are doing something in a rather crafty, underhand manner. And again, that ties in with the this word deceitful. So he's clearly lying to his foe. He's tricking him. He has something planned for him. The word soft is almost, oxymoronic, because soft would usually be associated when you treat someone rather gently, with compassion. Obviously, he's lying to his foe and seems to have something, um, unpleasant planned for him. So again, really summoning that image in your mind of a metaphorical poison tree that he is watering with his tears. He's letting this anger fester and grow and grow and grow. So this poison tree, grew both day and night. Um, Again, that's quite interesting, day and night. So thinking about how it's almost all consuming his hatred. Actually, he's thinking about his hatred towards his foe during the day, and perhaps it won't even let him sleep. It's keeping him up at night, this hatred. And we don't know what the foe, we never find out what the foe did to the speaker, or William Blake, if we're going to call the speaker William Blake, to make him hate, um, this foe. So it's very interesting. He's growing this tree, and as a result of this, it bore an apple bright. So again, this is clearly all part of that extended metaphor. That this hatred, um, has produced fruit, and an apple. And think about, the idea of, there's a term people use, the fruits of your labour. So if you graft and graft, and if you work hard on something, there will be some end products. If you are spending all day building a shed, presumably by the end of that time, a shed will be produced. And it's almost looking at that phrase, and this hatred is the work that he's being put in. And as a result of this hard work, hating his foe, an apple has been produced. But obviously, this apple is metaphorical. Think about the significance of the apple as well. And remember, I told you at the start of this lesson that William Blake is a very, yeah, or was a deeply religious man. So this apple has clear religious associations. So the tree in the story of Genesis, um, which was really the Christian idea of how the world began when there was Adam and Eve were the first people on earth, and the tree in the Genesis story was the tree of knowledge, and the apple on the tree of knowledge was the forbidden fruit. You weren't supposed to eat the apple, bad things will happen. But they are tempted by a snake in the story of Genesis. They do eat the apple, uh, and they are basically exiled from paradise. So really, we need to keep in mind that religious story from Genesis of the apple. So let's move on to the next line. And my foe beheld it shine. So the foe is actually, the speaker's foe is actually studying the fruit of his labour and his hatred, and it shines. And he knew that it was mine. So this sets up some sort of conflict between the speaker and the foe. So the fact that despite the fact that the foe is aware that the apple is his possession, he still takes it. So, although this is almost certainly a metaphorical event, perhaps it hints at why there was conflict between these two people, that there were actions taken by the foe that infuriated the speaker. So, final stanza, it's a fairly short poem. And into my garden stole when the night had failed the pole. So we don't know why, but for some reason the foe has sneaked into the speaker's garden at night, and why we're not sure. But we also, if we go back to the previous stanza, it says he took the apple, okay, from the speaker. He that he stole from the garden at night. Now, what's the result of this? So remember, this apple is a product of this poison tree that the speaker has been growing out of his own hatred. So the final two line, in the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. So why is the foe outstretched beneath the tree? Well, we can probably work out why, and that it's been poisoned. So he has been poisoned by his hatred. And again, why was the foe in the garden in the first place? You could argue that perhaps, and again, there's no evidence for this either way, but perhaps we could theorize that the foe was almost seeking some sort of reconciliation with the speaker. And perhaps that he saw the metaphorical apple as almost like an olive branch to say, look, let's reconcile things. But obviously, it wasn't an olive branch; it was a poisoned apple. So his hatred has killed his foe. So it's quite a nasty little poem. I'm thinking we're talking about morals here. If he really hates, if the speaker really hates his foe, then this is a victory for him. He has killed his sworn enemy. But on a moral level, this is definitely a moral failure. And consider, again, Blake was a deeply religious man. Thou shalt not kill. This would have been a great moral failure. And what is the point of the poem? Is it to present how that hatred, if allowed to fester, it will eat away at you, it will grow and grow and grow till maybe it forces you to commit a very sinful act, in this case, the poisoning of a foe. So perhaps we can read it as a cautionary tale against not allowing your hatred to grow. And certainly, if we can go back to the early stanzas where it says, I was angry with my friend, I told my wrath did end. So when he is open about his hatred, and negative feelings. Those negative feelings end, but when he lets them fester, that's when they grow and grow and grow. So perhaps that's the cautionary message that William Blake is presented. Or some critics have just theorised that this is a particularly nasty poem, and it just reflects on the fact sometimes the human experience and humanity can be nasty. People can be consumed by hatred. People can wrong each other in many ways, and sometimes actually that hatred, as a result of that, does not go away, and it builds and builds and builds. Okay, the final thing we're going to do is we are going to look at the form and structure of the poem. So if we have a look at the form then, so the poem is written in quatrains, so that's 4-line stanzas. In fact, there are 4 quatrains, so it's a very uniform, very consistent form. And remember that William Blake pays particular attention to the form of his poems as an artist. So why is it so consistent? Why is his poem so uniform and consistent? So I would say that the simplicity and clarity of the form, 4 lines, 4 stanzas, is used to express a very clear and universal moral message. This is actually one of the shorter lessons, and perhaps there's a reason for that. It is a relatively simple poem to understand, and that is deliberate by William Blake. He wants his message to be quite simple, and he wants to express the fact that it's universal. We all will experience feelings of hatred at some point in our lives, where we don't agree with somebody, where we don't like someone. So again, he's speaking on quite a universal level here. Okay, so what about the structure? So I should say, as a recap, so the form of a poem refers to the shape of the stanzas in a poem, the size of the stanzas, and the number of the stanzas. The structure refers to the rhyme scheme and also the meter of the poem. And remember, meter refers to the number of syllables in a line and whether they're stressed or unstressed. So the rhyme scheme is very straightforward, like the form, and it's comprised of rhyming couplets. So it goes A, B, B. Just to sort of prove this, let's just flick back to the last stanza. And if we look at the last words of the line, stole, pole, sea, tree, and let's do the others as well. Night bright, shine mine, fears, tears, smiles, wiles, friend end, foe row. So as you can see, quite straightforward rhyming couplets. What is the deeper meaning and reason behind this? So the simplicity of the rhyme scheme gives the poem a childlike, almost nursery rhyme feel to the poem. So again, perhaps this reflects the simplicity of the moral message. And actually, if we think about nursery rhymes, and indeed stories that parents throughout going back very far in history, we think about Aesop's fables, very short, simple messages presented to children. So not that this is a poem directed at children, but actually the simplicity of the structure and the form is there to present a very simple moral message. So the meter of the poem is known as trochaic. Now, how we express this, so the idea of it being trochaic is the way that the syllables are stressed and unstressed. So a way of presenting this, if a syllable is stressed, we would say dumb, so to represent that it's a particularly stressed syllable, and if a syllable is unstressed, we go D. So dum dee dum dee dum dee dum dee dum dee dum. So that's a trochaic meter. And if we'll look at other poems in this series that follow an iambic meter, and they would go da dum da dum da dum da dum da dum. Because this is trochaic, it goes dum de dum de dum de dum de dum. Why? So it gives the poem almost a sing-song quality, which again makes it more memorable. and further reinforces that message, that simple message that you mustn't allow hatred to grow and fester, or it can lead to deadly consequences. And it is a straightforward message, and the whole point of the form structure and the meter is to reflect that simplicity. Okay, so that was a lesson on A Poison Tree by William Blake. Check out the other videos on my channel for the rest of the poems in the Edexcel Conflict series. Thanks for listening.